Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. Calling on the House of Representatives to immediately consider gun violence prevention legislation. Whereas gun violence affects every community in our nation, whereas 30 people are killed every day by someone using a gun, whereas more than 2,200 people have been killed this year by someone using a gun, whereas there have been at least 34 mass shootings this year, whereas while mass shootings often receive media attention, gun violence is present every day in every community. Whereas since the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School, the House of Representatives has held 43 moments of silence to honor the memory of people killed by someone using guns. Whereas most gun owners are responsible and law-abiding.
House will be in order. Gentleman from California.
Whereas most gun owners are responsible and law-abiding. Whereas the Supreme Court, in its District of Columbia versus Heller decision, recognized the right to keep and to bear arms. Whereas the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act was enacted on November 30th, 1993. Whereas background checks have been successful and every day stop more than 170 felons, some 50 domestic abusers, and nearly 20 fugitives from buying a gun. Whereas over 2 million gun sales were blocked since enactment of the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act. Whereas 90% of all background checks are done instantly. Whereas the states that require background checks, 47% fewer women are murdered by intimate partners. Whereas in states that require background checks, there are 47% firearm suicides. Whereas in states that require background checks, 53% fewer law enforcement officers are killed by someone using a gun. Whereas 97% of Americans polled support background checks for all gun sales. Whereas in many states, no background check is required to buy a gun online or at a gun show. And whereas the President has said, quote, whether we are Republican or Democrats must now focus on strengthening background checks, end quote. Now therefore be it resolved that the House of Representatives should immediately consider H.R. 4240, the Public Safety and Second Amendment Rights Protection Act of 2017, and H.R. 3464, the Background Check Completion Act of 2017.